She had never spoken a single word in her entire life. Not one. 26 years. And not one intelligible sound that doctors could explain as language, as memory, or as thought. Her brain had been damaged so severely by a condition she was born with and by repeated meningitis infections throughout her childhood that the chief psychiatrist at her institution had documented in writing that the neurological tissue required for coherent speech and memory had been destroyed. That was the medical record. That was the clinical reality. On the morning of March 1st, 1922, in a psychiatric institution in Schwalmstadt, Germany, she was dying. Tuberculosis. Final stage. The doctors knew it. The staff knew it. And then she sat up and she began to sing. Not random sounds, not fragmented noise. A complete German hymn. Where does the soul find its home, its peace? Sung clearly, intelligibly, with full memory of every word, for nearly 30 minutes.
The two men standing in that room were Friedrich Happich, the institution's director, and Dr. Wilhelm Wittneben, the chief psychiatrist. Both were among the most respected figures in their fields. Both had treated her for years. Both had documented her complete inability to speak. Dr. Wittneben later wrote, and I am quoting his exact words, "From a medical perspective, I am confronted with a mystery." Her name was Anna Katharina Ehmer, and her case, documented, witnessed by two senior medical professionals, and studied by researchers at the University of Virginia over 90 years later, remains one of the most difficult documented phenomena in the history of neuroscience to explain. But to understand why it's impossible to dismiss, you need to understand exactly what her brain was supposed to be incapable of. The human brain stores memory and produces language through a network of structures, the hippocampus, the temporal lobe, Broca's area, that require intact, functioning neural tissue to operate. When that tissue is damaged severely enough through disease, through infection, through prolonged oxygen deprivation, those functions don't just slow down, they stop. The capacity to retrieve stored memory, to sequence words, to produce coherent speech, these are not things a damaged brain improvises around. They are things a damaged brain simply cannot do. Anna Katharina Ehmer had suffered repeated, severe meningitis infections across her lifetime. Meningitis, inflammation of the membranes surrounding the brain, causes direct damage to cortical tissue when it occurs repeatedly and severely enough. Her medical records, reviewed by Dr. Wittneben across years of treatment, documented what he described as the destruction of the neural tissue required for intelligent reasoning. Think about what you are being asked to accept here. This is not a case of someone who was a little confused suddenly becoming clear. This is not a case of a mild cognitive impairment briefly lifting. This is a woman with documented, severe, lifelong neurological damage. Damage that had been professionally assessed, recorded, and confirmed, who in her final hours produced a complete, sequenced, memorized piece of music. She had never learned to sing it. There was no record of her ever having heard it performed. She had no documented exposure to the hymn in any form that her caregivers could identify. And yet she sang it, completely, for 30 minutes, while dying. Dr. Wittneben did not write a spiritual interpretation of what he witnessed. He wrote a medical one. He said he did not know how it was possible. He said that from a neurological standpoint, it should not have been.
The University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, the same institution connected to the Aware study research, formally studied the Ehmer case decades after her death. researchers Dr. Michael Naum and Dr. Bruce Grayson published their findings in the journal Omega, Journal of Death and Dying, in 2014. Their work on Kathy Ehmer was part of a broader review that identified 83 documented cases of what they termed terminal lucidity, spanning 250 years of medical literature, reported by 55 different authors, the majority of whom were medical professionals. Now, I want you to hold this specific number in your mind. Of those 83 cases, 84% of patients died within 1 week of their lucid episode. 43% died within 24 hours. This is not a random scattering of occasional events across medical history. This is a documented, recurring pattern, reported consistently across cultures, across centuries, across completely different neurological conditions. Patients with severe, confirmed brain damage briefly return to cognitive function they should not have access to immediately before death. The cases span Alzheimer's disease, brain tumors, chronic schizophrenia, strokes, meningitis, and brain abscesses. The damaged tissue was real. The documented return of function was also real. And here is the question that Naum and Grayson stated directly in their published paper. If memory and cognition require intact neural tissue to function, and if that tissue was documented as severely damaged or destroyed, then what mechanism accounts for the return of those functions in the final hours before death? They did not answer that question, because it has not been answered.
Now I need to address the most obvious counter-argument directly, because it is a reasonable one, and ignoring it would be dishonest. The skeptic's argument goes like this. We are relying on historical accounts from 1922. The documentation of Kathy Ehmer's neurological damage was based on the medical standards of that era, not on modern MRI or CT imaging. Is it possible that her brain damage was less severe than documented? That some residual function existed that the tools of 1922 simply couldn't detect? This is a legitimate question, and the honest answer is we cannot rule it out entirely for this specific case. Here is what we can say. First, the assessment of her condition was made by experienced, credentialed physicians over years of direct observation, not by a single rushed examination. Dr. Wittneben's conclusion that her damage was severe was based on sustained clinical contact, not a single data point. Second, the broader pattern of 83 cases across 250 years includes cases from far more recent decades, where modern neuroimaging was available and did confirm severe brain damage prior to the lucid episode. Third, and this is the point Naum and Grayson make most carefully in their paper, the question is not simply whether some residual function existed. The question is whether that residual function could account for the specific cognitive output observed. In Kathy Ehmer's case, not just basic sound production, but a complete, sequenced, memorized hymn, never previously observed to be within her capacity, produced during the process of dying. Dr. Grayson is a clinical psychiatrist with decades of research experience at the University of Virginia. He did not publish this paper as a spiritual argument. He published it as a medical one, specifically to push for further scientific investigation of a documented phenomenon that current neuroscience does not adequately explain. Now I need to address the most obvious counter-argument directly, because it is a reasonable one, and ignoring it would be dishonest. The skeptic's argument goes like this. We are relying on historical accounts from 1922. The documentation of Kathy Ehmer's neurological damage was based on the medical standards of that era, not on modern MRI or CT imaging. Is it possible that her brain damage was less severe than documented? That some residual function existed that the tools of 1922 simply couldn't detect? This is a legitimate question, and the honest answer is, we cannot rule it out entirely for this specific case. Here is what we can say. First, the assessment of her condition was made by experienced, credentialed physicians over years of direct observation, not by a single rushed examination.
Dr. Wittneben's conclusion that her damage was severe was based on sustained clinical contact, not a single data point. Second, the broader pattern of 83 cases across 250 years includes cases from far more recent decades, where modern neuroimaging was available and did confirm severe brain damage prior to the lucid episode. Third, and this is the point Nahm and Grayson make most carefully in their paper, the question is not simply whether some residual function existed. The question is whether that residual function could account for the specific cognitive output observed. In Kathy Ehmer's case, not just basic sound production, but a complete, sequenced, memorized hymn, never previously observed to be within her capacity, produced during the process of dying. Dr. Grayson is a clinical psychiatrist with decades of research experience at the University of Virginia. He did not publish this paper as a spiritual argument. He published it as a medical one, specifically to push for further scientific investigation of a documented phenomenon that current neuroscience does not adequately explain.
That is not a researcher promising you the afterlife is real. That is a researcher saying something is happening here that our current model of brain function cannot account for, and it deserves to be studied properly. Subscribe, because next week we go to one of the most unusual categories of evidence in this entire series. Healthy people, people who are not dying, who have no medical emergency, who stand beside a dying person and begin to experience the same thing the dying person is experiencing. It is called a shared death experience. Multiple independent witnesses have described identical details, and it has now been documented in peer-reviewed research. That case is next. You already know something most people spend their whole lives avoiding. That is not nothing.